Above a burning forest in southern Western Australia, a government chopper flies low through the smoke. But not to drop water on the blaze below. Instead, the crew are dropping firebombs, incendiaries to set the forest alight. On the fire ground, parks and wildlife crews keep watch.
We've basically edged all the way along this power line, probably 50 odd.
Today's task is to set fire to a 700-hectare block of native trees.
It looks like things are picking
near
up.
Manjimup, about 300 kilometres south of Perth. It hasn't been burned for more than 10 years. It's part of a Southwest Forests planned burn program to reduce forest fuel loads, to protect locals from bushfires.
Undertaking this burn has been really important to make sure that we've got some younger fuels in the landscape to protect Manjimup and to protect the surrounding communities and infrastructure. And it gives our firefighters the best chance if we do get a fire start in the area. The younger fuels will allow us the best opportunity to get around that fire and to extinguish it and contain it.
It's a practice that's been enshrined in the state's forest management plan since the 1990s. Parks and Wildlife have a target to have 45% of the forest at a fuel age of 6 years or less. That's 200,000 hectares burnt each year. For the West Australian Environment Minister, it's a responsible public safety policy.
I have nightmares, essentially, of having fires like the eastern states did last year. And so I'm very supportive of the prescribed burning program that my department does.
Western Australia knows how dangerous fires can be. In February this year, fire tore through a rural area east of Perth, destroying dozens of houses.
Authorities are counting the cost of what's been described as one of Western Australia's most devastating fires in half a century.
In 2016, fire almost wiped out the town of Yarloop.
143 properties have been destroyed, and overnight 2 people were found dead in their Yarloop homes.
All forms of bushfire management come with costs and risks. Too little fire or too much can be dangerous for people and the environment. And in the southwest, there's concern that authorities aren't getting the balance right. This wetland peat swamp was extensively damaged in 2019 during a planned burn by the Parks and Wildlife Service. Conservation scientists have been warning about the vulnerability of swamps to frequent fires and the slow recovery of the ecosystems after a hot burn.
But this area has been burnt 3 times in the last 20 years. So it's the frequency of fire and the burning under dry conditions and drought conditions.
South Coast farmer and trained botanist Joanna Young is part of the Lewin independent group of concerned scientists. It's committed to the conservation and protection of Western Australia's biodiversity and natural environment.
I use this as an example because I really feel it's pretty obvious to see, and it's easy to explain to people that these are the sorts of systems that we're not looking after well enough in our conservation estate.
She's now questioning the government's burning program as being needlessly indiscriminate.
I think the Lewin Group people believe that the policy is driving extensive burning a long way away from towns, but this happens to be the country where we've still got mainland quokka populations, less dieback. Example, there's been less historic disturbance in some of these areas. So it's really sad that those areas, which I think they should be the arc, we're now imposing these frequent fires.
I'll just take you into Mitchell Road.
Local vet and conservationist Dr. David Edmonds grew up in Walpole, a small town close to some of the oldest forests in WA.
And there's only 2 areas of core wilderness in the Walpole Wilderness.
Now he's also speaking out about preserving fragile wilderness areas from planned burns.
Fire is okay, provided it doesn't get down into the substrate. And unfortunately, because we're seeing a drying climate, the peats are drying earlier in the year and not re-wetting, these systems are far more vulnerable to fire than they ever used to be.
The Walpole Wilderness is regarded as one of the world's biodiversity hotspots. Here there are more than 6,000 species of plants and 100 species of mammals, birds, reptiles and frogs, 80% of which live in this tiny corner of the planet. In the department's management plans from 2008 and 2013, there are references to swamps in the wilderness being of national importance, with the Mount Soho swamps listed in the Directory of Important Wetlands in Australia 20 years ago. Joanna Young says it was irreversibly damaged in a prescribed burn in 2015. And this wetland swamp in the wilderness, 35 kilometres north of Walpole, caught fire during a planned burn in spring last year. It has continued to burn and smoulder up until February this year.
And when we're seeing that loss at such a scale, we know that particular area won't recover. The process for recovery takes centuries.
Last year's Black Summer bushfires were described as an ecological disaster, but the National Bushfire Royal Commission found fire management, including deliberate burning, can actually drive biodiversity conservation. But Dr. Edmonds says burning has to be thoughtfully managed.
Prescribed burning is a really important tool for protecting communities and private properties. By no means are we advocating that we stop prescribed burning, but what we want to look at is using it strategically in the right locations, particularly close to towns, in those zones, around private properties and around towns. But as you move further away from towns, to give the environment its opportunity as well.
Southwest beekeepers are also worried.
I want to point out that I'm not against prescribed burning.
Apiarist Bart Lebbing has spent 40 years producing honey from bees that have gathered nectar from the southern forests close to his hometown of Denmark.
But I want to say that the current policy, which is a 200,000 hectare area within the southwest of WA, is unsustainable. The frequency, like the country is burnt on a 6-year rotation, in my opinion, is unsustainable. We are burning country which is 30-40 kilometers from the nearest human habitation. We're protecting blue gum plantations and burning our forests.
He's worried the frequency of the fires will reduce honey production.
I think the beekeeping industry has got a very, very bleak future if this continues.
And he's concerned the minister is not listening to people in the community.
I hope that the minister will change. I hope that the minister actually will start listening to our concerns, which he hasn't done over the last 12 months.
The state's forest management plan is being reviewed. The minister's aware this is a sensitive and important issue, and he isn't dismissing community concerns.
Not at all. They're very real concerns, but I certainly rely on the advice that the scientists in my agency give me, and they do this work on a daily basis. It is about balance. I've got to take on board the concerns of the community. I've got to continue to get elected at election time, so I'm very alive to the views of the community. But in this case, I listen to the scientists in my agency. The job the agency has undertaking prescribed burning gets tougher every year. We've got more and more neighbours. We've got the wine industry who don't want it happening at various times. We've got beekeepers who don't want it happening at various times. And of course, we've got less rainfall and less water. So all of those things will be taken into consideration as part of the next review.
West Australian authorities are certain that regular prescribed burning of the bush, even far from settlement, helps reduce the risk of catastrophic fire reaching communities. and they believe they have broad community support for the program. The lessons of last summer's bushfires has strengthened the government's resolve. They've put an extra $22 million into the budget over the next 4 years to enhance the burning program.
What's critical in making sure that we don't take our eye off the landscape is making sure that we prevent those large catastrophic landscape level fires. So we saw what happened on the East Coast. Ultimately, if we leave these larger fires in the landscape unchecked, they do come into communities, because ultimately what they do is they burn hot and they will have a negative impact on conservation as well.
But Joanna Young says that the policy lacks nuance and the flexibility to avoid damaging vulnerable ecosystems. The argument put forward by the government, she says, is binary and divisive.
The fear factor is thrown, you know, that you're all going to, if we don't burn all the bush and all the national parks, you know, community's going to be lost. Well, really, that is a very simplistic argument against what we're trying to say. To get this polarised debate about to burn or not to burn isn't helpful. I think the community should be able to have a much more informed discussion, probably with government, as to what the trade-offs are and work out a way to do it better. I would really like to get more of the bureaucrats and some of the politicians to come down so that we could take them and look at some of this country, some of the country I've been observing for the last 35 years since I've lived in Walpole. Perhaps those images of those peat systems will be like the Julkan Cave moment for DBCA to say, yeah, hey, the public are really getting restive now. We better review what we're doing.